the island after the COVID break, multi-goal win over the Caps on Sunday on national TV. And then this, Zach Aston Reese scores with about 5 minutes left, breaking the shutout, so it prevents that indignity. But the Pens still lose for the first time in 4 meetings this season against the Caps so far. 3-1 is your final score at PPG Paints Arena. I'm Matt Gajtka with Alan Saunders. This is Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. A lot to talk about, both small and big picture. And we want to hone in on, well, some of the line combinations, the return of Marcus Pedersen, maybe another night in the up and down season of Tristan Jarry. As Yevgeny Malkin turns, there's a lot here to discuss and break down. Power play as well. It was decisive on both ends of the ice, maybe not in the traditional way, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But Alan, the Penguins have trailed in all 6 games they've played at PPG Paints Arena this season, so it was, as I was saying, a matter of time before they lost one in regulation. So here they are, 7-6-1, pretty much exactly at 500 once again on this NHL year. Feels about right for just how the trajectory has gone, doesn't it?
It does. I don't have it's interesting because I think, like, it's not a lot of the reasons they lost this game tonight are not necessarily all the same reasons. They're in the position they are on the season, I think. And that always makes it tough when you're trying to do some analysis. I don't think they've, like, their power play did not score tonight, but I thought it looked pretty good. Like, I thought they got good chances on it. They just didn't score. And if they had scored, if they hit the post twice in that first power play, if they score one of those, this entire game probably plays out differently. And who knows, maybe it's a win. And they've been, you know, like, they have not gotten great goaltending. I thought Tristan Jarry was maybe one of their best players on the ice tonight. So, like, it's really hard to put this loss in context of, like, the overall issues, which have been significant.
Yeah, it's funny about Jarry. We'll get to that in a moment. Once again, I got a couple of folks chirping at me about how he's playing too deep in his net. Well, when the puck comes from behind your own goal, you can't exactly get on top of the crease instantaneously. But you're right. I think he played better tonight than he did on Sunday. Of course, the W was earned on Sunday, and the L was in the column here on Tuesday night. I do want to talk power play first. Good place to start because you brought it up. Letang's shot from the point deflected, I think, by Jake Gensel off the post. Sidney Crosby hits the post on a slam dunk that he buries, I would say, no exaggeration, 99 times out of 100. But it doesn't go in this time, and then the Caps start to turn things. The Penguins had, I think, 5 of the first 6 shots on target. They were peppering Vanacek, who still doesn't look very solid to me, but luckily for the Caps, they're going to get Ilya Samsonov back, I think, rather soon. He's now doing a rehab stint in the AHL. They've given up a lot of goals, have the Capitals, so have the Penguins. This game was, I think, wide open, and maybe the 3-1 final score belied how wide open it was. But really, the Caps did what the Penguins couldn't do, Alan, because after they had a couple of dominant power plays in the second period, talking about the Capitals, they actually scored. They actually capitalized on the momentum generated after that. They took advantage of a tired Penguins team, got a little strung out there after a missed odd man rush at the other end of the ice, and it was the goal from Jakub Vrana that I think was the backbreaker tonight that made it 2-0. So you might not always score on your power plays, but you always hear players and coaches talk about you want to capitalize on the momentum that's built from that. The Penguins couldn't do that. The Caps had an immediate pushback in the first period, and then really Washington kept the pedal down for a long time after they had those 2 really effective power plays in the second.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think both times that came against, like, some mixed up Penguins defense after a penalty kill, because, like, they switch up the pairs a little bit. You put Pedersen back into the mix for the first time tonight, so you had some guys that aren't necessarily that haven't played with each other a lot. And I don't know if that's excuse making, but that certainly was a lack of communication on the Penguins defense as a whole tonight. I think it led directly to all 3 Washington goals, whether it was guys left uncovered, 2 guys going to the same guy, a bad switch on one of them. And so it's interesting to me that a couple of those came right after a penalty kill when you do mix the pairings up after that going forward sometimes. But yeah, I didn't think the Penguins defense was good enough in this one to win this kind of game. Like, the Capitals had a ton of opportunities. You can you can win that kind of game if you keep everything to the outside and you let them have 40 shots, but they're low percentage shots. The Penguins lost track of too many guys in dangerous scoring areas for that to happen, and that's how they end up giving up 3 goals on a night where I thought Tristan Jarry played pretty well.
Well, you brought up the defense pairings. I think it's ironic that the defense has suffered so many injuries and so many issues this season, but really it's the forward core that appears to be suffering from depth problems. And tonight, again, Colton Sevier, Sam Lafferty, they barely saw the ice. They had about 3 minutes each. The only reason Mark Jankowski played more than that was because he's a pretty decent penalty killer, or at least he's being used in the penalty killing role. It's kind of tough to evaluate at this point of the season, at this point of his Penguins tenure, whether he's really a PK ace or not. But you look at the Malkin line, again, not really much of a factor until late, once Brandon Tanev was pushed up there. I feel like Mike Sullivan has to start to shuffle some things up outside of the top unit with Crosby, Gensel, and Russ, which has been effective game in and game out. Another pretty good game for them, too, even though they didn't generate a goal. But they tilted the ice and looked pretty good according to some shot metrics as well. But I know that the Bluger line was playing well with Aston Reese and Tanev on his flanks, but it's more important. I don't think it's a stretch. Maybe you disagree, but I think it's more important to find a way to get the second line, the Malkin line, going. So I didn't mind putting Tanev up there with him, even though it's not like Tanev's going to add a lot of goal-scoring touch, but he might give them a spark. So I didn't mind that. How did you feel about that push from Sullivan there late?
Yeah, I don't mind that because I think that's the existential question about this Penguin season. I think that's the reason they are where they are in the standings. Is not look. I mean, they had some mixed up defensive assignments tonight. They came within 2 inches of scoring on the power play and didn't. And that's the difference between a 3-1 loss and maybe this game going to overtime or something like that. But the reason they're a 500 team, and I said this during the game on Twitter, is that when the Capital star players get the puck, they're terrifying. Like Alex Ovechkin is still lightning with the puck all the time. He when even if he's not creating a goal, he's creating scoring chances. He's demanding defensive attention, and it is draining to play that way when you are terrified of the guy on the other side having the puck, right? It is very draining to sit there and play defense when you're like, oh my God, 8 has it. What am I going to do? I got to get over there now. I can't. And even when he doesn't have the puck, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Well, I got to get over there. That is mentally and physically exhausting to play against. And right now, the Penguin Stars are not doing that to other teams. No one is terrified when 71 has the puck right now. No one. They're like, all right, we'll just stand here. I'll probably shoot it in the stands. That's a key part of what the Penguins are doing. One of the Penguins love that sort of 3-center model that they built their back-to-back Stanley Cups on. And the whole point of that is that you get teams that are playing that mental and physical stress of trying to run down these 2 elite centers. And then the third line can be just as dangerous because you put them out there and it's a cumulative effect, right? And everybody's making each other better. The Penguins aren't getting that because their second line is a crater. Their fourth line, frankly, do not appear to be NHL level players. I don't really know how to say it any more bluntly than that. And so other teams can just rest up their D, save them for the Crosby unit that seems to be working pretty well. And yeah, I think Tanev, when played with that line, looked pretty dangerous, but it can't be the first line really good matched up against a rested top D pair and the third line doing a little bit. That's not going to drive your offense. You have to connect those lines and have dangerous offensive possessions back to back, dangerous shifts back to back. That's how you're going to get this to work. And so whatever it takes, whether it's different players on that line, whether it's different players in the organization, that they can't get another Evgeny Malkin. So they've got to find a way to get Evgeny Malkin going.
That would be, I think, task number 1 for Mike Sullivan right now. I think the power play is coming around. You alluded to it, Alan. They looked effective in their 3 opportunities tonight, despite the no goals. They're starting to shoot it a little bit more. They're starting to force teams to come out and at least try to block that shot and challenge them. And we're seeing some of those cross-seam passes open up. And like we said, probably should have had at least 1 conversion tonight. And that's a lot better than what we were able to say about the power play for a stretch of, 7 or 8 games there. The first few games weren't bad in terms of execution. But I know Todd Reardon was pulling whatever hair he has left out of his skull for a little bit there, wondering, man. I do remember how tough it is to coach these guys sometimes. And of course, we're talking about a guy who's coached a pretty effective power play in Washington for a bit too. But that Washington power play really is the platonic ideal for me, Alan. And I think part of it is something as perhaps arbitrary or lucky, you want to put it that way, of handedness. You have a left-handed centerman in Nick Backstrom who can pass to either Carlson or Ovechkin on the other side of the ice, on the left side of the ice for one-timers. But the two more playmaking guys you have for the Penguins, actually the Penguins don't really have a gunner overall. They don't have a guy, Letang, Malkin, or Crosby, who's most comfortable shooting it. I think Malkin's maybe the closest, and I think he's starting to get it through his head that he has a really good shot if he puts it to use. So I think the power play is turning a corner here, but they just don't have that perfect personnel setup like the Caps do they?
No, and I don't think they have an ideal sort of puck retrieval scenario there either. I think they're still working on that a little bit. But I think they're, look, the Caps have a really good power play because they're one of the best shooters in hockey. I think the Penguins power play, when it's been really good over the last few years, had Phil Kessel on it in that spot, right? You need someone that is going to be a really good shot. At some point, your power play, the whole point of the man advantage is to get somebody with a really good shot and open look at the net. I mean, you can score rebound goals and dirty goals, and that's great. You should do it more often when you have an extra guy out there. But the point of what you're doing on the power play is to try to get somebody with a really good shot and open look, to move those five guys around the four guys more effectively to leave somebody wide open. And I think what's happening is the Penguins are getting to the spot where they're getting those open shots, but they're just not making them enough. Like if Evgeny Malkin is their trigger guy, and he's not shooting very well right now. Sidney Crosby's never really been that guy. Chris Letang, frankly, not a very accurate shooter, and they don't have anybody else that really. I don't know how Jake Gensel fits into that. He has not really fit into it successfully so far, even though he is clearly a talented enough player to be on that unit. I'm not sure what the answer there is.
I think Gensel can be an alternative, if you want to call it that way, a net front presence guy. He's not a Patrick Hornqvist, clearly.
No.
And that's going to be a hole they try to cover up. But power plays that are effective don't necessarily need someone who stands right in front of the net. I mean, TJ Oshie, Tom Wilson on the Caps, they're not necessarily guys who just take a lot of punishment. They're pretty talented players. Wilson more rough and tumble when he does get an opportunity out there. But and Oshie can handle his own, but they're both guys who aren't in that Hornqvist or Tomas Holmstrom mold, if you're familiar with him from the Red Wings days. Guys you think about in terms of just taking up space in front and drawing defenders to them and forcing some openings perhaps on the sides. But I think Gensel can flit in and out of the slot. I think he can be nifty and can be effective in that way. Alan, I don't think Jake Gensel is all the way back, though. There are a few plays again tonight where usually he and Sid are of one mind, and it still feels like Jake's timing is not quite there, and there are too many of those missed plays that between Sid and Jake used to be automatic. So I think he's still working his way back, and he missed a lot of time, and then he came right back for the playoffs. So he played, 4 games in about a 12-month span. So I think that's going to be one aspect of this team's attack to watch is can Gensel get back to where he was when he was putting in 40 goals? Because I think it's still in there. I don't think it's lost by any means because of the shoulder surgery, but there you have it. He's obviously important, and the line's been effective without him being at the top of his game. But still, there's enough there where you say, okay, they can be better in terms of finishing. Do you leave that first line alone, even if Sullivan is tempted to really shuffle some things up here?
I don't know. If you can get the second line going better without hurting the first line, I think Sidney Crosby's proven throughout most of his career that he can elevate lesser players. I'm not sure how much that's still the case, but it's a theory worth pursuing, I think, right? I mean, if you think that Evgeny Malkin getting back to his game is the number one key to turning this team's season around, then you do whatever you need to make that happen, and you let everything else fall however else it falls. I don't know that that anything needs to be spared for that. I'm also not sure that Gensel is a particularly great stylistic fit for Malkin anyway. I think he's probably better with Crosby. So I don't, I don't, I don't know that you need to keep that first line together, but I wouldn't hesitate to break it up either if I thought it was going to work.
What do you think that Brian Burke and Ron Hextall are thinking after watching this team for 3 games? As I mentioned, 2 pretty decent ones, a pretty good one against Washington, in fact, on Sunday. And then this one where they fall flat after some early missed opportunities. Maybe a better question is, how long can they wait before they really get a nice picture of what they have here? I don't think it takes any kind of a genius to see that they're thin up front. They need some more at that position. So I'm wondering if they're looking at the blue line and saying, okay, who might be expendable here? Who might have some trade value? Because for me, depth up front, I don't care where it is, down the middle or on the wings, I still feel like that's priority number one here as we head into trade deadline season.
Yeah, I think I'm going to think what I said earlier. Sort of is that the Penguins, you think like, okay, well, hey, they want me to be the general manager with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, or they want me to be the president for those two guys. Yeah, sure. They're not playing like their reputation suggests they should be, and I don't know that. Yeah, look, they're not deep enough offensively. They're just not. They don't have enough quality forwards, but man, I don't know. I don't know that you're going to get enough quality forwards to make up for what they're missing from what Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby have been to what they've gotten out of those two guys so far this season. And Crosby's been a lot better than Malkin has, but he also has not been himself either. And at some point, either those guys are going to have to get back to that level of play, or the rest of the team around them is going to have to get a lot better, because that's the only two ways I see it working.
I had a thought about Marcus Pedersen. He came back to the lineup tonight, pushing Chad Ruhwedel up, by the way, out of the lineup, which I didn't like because I like Chad Ruhwedel a lot, especially for the value that they get on that contract. But just in general, as a player, putting the money aside, I think Chad's made some serious strides and got a chance there with some injuries piling up. But Pedersen, for me, young enough at 24, pretty reasonable cap hit. I think it's about $4 million. I have to look that one up to nail that down. But he's under control for a couple more seasons. I feel like he would have a lot of value on the market. And I'm not sure, no offense to him, but I don't know if you'd necessarily miss him a lot just because of just because of the way some guys have stepped up. I think Cody Cece's been a nice signing. I believe in his ability. And I know that you want to trade Mike Matheson probably, but you're not going to be able to find a taker, I don't think. And you're not going to be able to get much back in terms of value if someone takes that contract off your hands. So I'm trying to find that sweet spot of a guy who's good enough to get something back, but also at the same time, not too good where you'll really miss him. So that's where I'm falling. Maybe Pedersen is someone that they shop, but I feel it's weird. Like I said, there's been all these injuries on D, but I still think that's where that surplus is if I'm trying to find a balance here. And balance out the roster a little bit better in terms of just this season, because you and I both know they're probably on the backside here of this championship window, and it's closing quickly. But they're talking win now still. So you're talking win now. That's where my mind goes, really.
Yeah, and I think the play of P.O. Joseph is what's made Pedersen somewhat expendable. I think that's a guy that really the Matheson trade kind of buried, and then all these injuries. He unburied himself, and I can't imagine him getting put back to Wilkes-Barre or something like that at this point. And so, yeah, I think he's made a left D expendable, and Pedersen is probably the one that I would look just over $4 million. Does have a long commitment to him to sign through 2025, but there's only so much they have to offer, right? I mean, outside of Pedersen, their 2021 draft is already basically gone. They've got a second and a fifth, I think.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
What else could they trade? I mean, they do have some prospects, I guess. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe they got to bring up one of these younger guys from Wilkes-Barre and see if they can be more than passengers. Because right now I think that's what they have a lot of in those depth forward slots. that's one of the reasons I didn't really care for acquiring Jankowski and Sevier, is that those guys at best are just mediocre. And one of the reasons the Penguins had that resurgence, uh, you know, in the mid to late 2010s, is that turned roles over. They gave guys coming up from Wilkes-Barre that Mike Sullivan had that personal experience with, that were not necessarily well heralded or highly touted prospects. They gave them roles. They just said, okay, here, you're going to play 15 minutes a night for 2 weeks and let's see if it works. And some of them turned into Brian Rust, and we saw Connor Sheary tonight on the other side of things, but obviously was part of that sort of generation of players that came up through. I would rather just turn to the farm and see what you've got than have a guy like Jankowski or Sevier that you just know is never going to be good. At the very best, you're going to get average to above average play out of those guys.
Let's go to some comments here on YouTube. Thanks to the folks in the live chat. A little more lively tonight. It's funny how a loss can sometimes stimulate the folks to get talking. Jeremy Call, that's a name and face here, or at least a new name and avatar on the YouTube chat. He says, we need a top-tier goalie. Also, I feel Malkin was not even a factor tonight. Yeah, Gino's just been off all season. I think he had some flashes on the power play where, like I said, being more aggressive, pumping pucks toward the net. We need more of that for sure in order to see that power play turn around. Top-tier goalie thing. Alan, I still feel like it's way too early to talk about whether Tristan Jarry is some sort of a bust here or the Penguins made the wrong move in terms of hanging on to him. I feel like it was the right move, much in the same way that Matt Murray was the right move when it was coming down to him versus Fleury, just because of the money and the contract terms and all that came into play. We're talking about not even 10 games yet for Tristan Jarry in this season. His first as you could call him the de facto number one starter. Maybe Mike Sullivan might feel differently, but I want to see more. And goaltending is a notoriously fickle position, so I know the ability is there. We saw it last year for a pretty extended stretch. So I'm not out on Jarry by any means. I think some folks have already turned against him to say that every goal against is somehow his fault. I think the Penguins got to give him a run of starts here. As much as I appreciate Casey DeSmith and his workmanlike habits and his ability to fill in when need be, I think the Pens got to see what they have here. That's where I feel. That's what I feel, and that's where I'm at on the Jarry situation. How about you?
Yeah, I think it would take a lot to get a goaltender that was a clear and obvious upgrade from Jarry, right? I mean, he's like hovering right about 900 on the save percentage. I think he's probably closer to 915 range true talent goaltender if you give him a year or two. If you go get a guy who's currently a 915 true talent, got a 915 save percentage, he's just as likely to go have a 900 as he is, to not. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It would take a significant investment. We just got done talking about how they don't have that many pieces to trade, and so I don't see how they could go get a goaltender that is clearly better. They need better goaltending. Their goaltending has not been good enough, and has been a significant reason that they are where they are. But I just don't see a way to go about that that seems more likely to succeed than just let Tristan Jarry play through it and get better.
More comments here from Walt Flanagan. He's as dependable as the sun rising in the morning. Well, I think the sun has been rising. I haven't seen it. People tell me that the sun is out there. But Walt Flanagan, though, says they're bad, and Mike Sullivan has no answers. That's kind of a criticism of him, but more damning of the players unable or unwilling to do the work. And that's a drum that Walt has banged here through the playoffs last year, really since the Penguins won back-to-back cups, is that he feels like the consistent work ethic isn't there. We all know it's important in hockey. We know that teams have traditionally gotten a spike from emotional moments, such as a coach getting changed over, or perhaps a new GM and a president of hockey operations being hired. Maybe that was a spike from the emotional side of things on Sunday and why they played that well. And I'll admit that it's a sport that has more of that than, say, baseball. But I also would note that I feel like it's just a flawed roster. I mean, you have a Mark Jankowski signed in the offseason for what appeared to be no reason at the time. It appeared needless. Like you said, Alan, let's roll up and see some of the the young players, even if they're not necessarily highly touted prospects, but maybe you stumble on a Brian Rust or a useful player like a Connor Sherry was here for a few years at least. That's the issue for me, is there's just some dead weight here signed to NHL deals, and you throw in some inconsistent to poor goaltending, and a couple of stars up front who maybe can't take over games like they did in the past, and there you have it. There just isn't that ability to roll lines. And as Teddy Bluger said tonight, he felt like the Capitals were playing in the attack zone the entire second period. How many games have we seen that from the Penguins where they're able to roll lines? I think it was Sunday, and that was about it. And even then, it wasn't the fourth line getting involved.
Yeah, and I think getting Zach Aston Reese is big for that. I think I was talking with Dan Kingerski after the last game about he's a piece that they don't have anybody else like him. I think he allows them to do some different things with that third or fourth line that he's on. But he's not going to be a guy that's going to move up the lineup a ton either. I mean, I think he can probably play like a full third line shift, but you're not going to get much more out of him than that. Yeah, I don't know. I think like these guys are getting older. Like it is not easy, and it's a truncated schedule. Both of this end of last season and into this season, when the core of your team is in its 30s, that's a situation where you need to have that youth and energy from other places. I don't think Crosby and Malkin have been good enough, but I think to expect them to exert the same effort on a regular basis that they did 10 years ago is just unrealistic. They don't have it. They can still be really good and productive, but they're not the same guy anymore. I'm not sure that's something that all growing teams go through, that you go through these cycles of you have guys that come up and they progress to a point, and what you're seeing that from the Penguins is sort of the consequence of all those years of trading all those draft picks, and that there's not really, doesn't appear to be anyway, another wave of youthful energy to turn to. There's nobody that's going to bring it, and I just don't think Crosby and Malkin can shoulder the energy load anymore. That's the other thing about guys like Jankowski and Sevier. If you're going to give me a bottom six guy that I know isn't very good, at least give me a guy that can skate.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you took away Brandon Tanev's hands, I'd still like to see him out there just because he causes havoc and he goes hard. And not to pick on those two guys, but they're bringing very little to the table right now.
Let's go to Facebook here, where we're streaming live on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now page. And a couple of mentions of Jason Zucker here. One from Christopher Weir. Alan talking about maybe he should be down on the third line. Christopher says he's underwhelmed, not to excuse his line mates. And John Witkowski asks, how do you nail Zach Aston Reese to the bench in the last 2 minutes in lieu of the big names, or at least a medium-sized name like Jason Zucker? I noticed he was out there late instead of ZAR, who has goals in 3 in a row for the first time since he was a collegian, leading the NCAA Division I ranks in goals for Northeastern up there in Boston, Massachusetts. But Zucker, to that point, I'm curious because I wanted to see what are his scoring rates in his NHL career. Well, coming into this season, he was a little bit more than a half point per game in his career and a little bit more than a goal every 4 games. So he has 3 goals now in 13 games for the Penguins and just 2 assists for a total of 5 points. So just a little off his usual goal scoring pace, not by much, honestly. It's a rounding error when it comes to stats and that sort of thing. And points, he's definitely behind there. And I would say overall, he just hasn't gotten as many of the chances that we saw early in the year. Maybe he got a little discouraged by not being able to bury some of those, and perhaps he's run into some frustration. Overall, just playing with Malkin hasn't been very productive for anybody outside of a couple of breakaway goals that Kasperi Kapanen got a handful of games back. So do you feel that Zucker has earned a demotion, quote unquote, and that the Penguins should maybe keep a guy like a Brandon Tanev up on the Malkin line and see if Zucker can perhaps inject some offense into the bottom 6 that way?
It's interesting because I thought Zucker was good maybe in like the first 3 or 4 games, and then it's kind of fallen off since then. And I kind of feel like the opposite about Kapanen, who I think has gotten better as the season's gone on. Yeah, I'll be honest. I think those two have earned another center. I don't think Not that they have one, really, but I think those two guys have you know, as much as you want to, they got to get Evgeny Malkin going too. But like, I think Jason Zucker is a pretty good player. He was not very good tonight, but I don't know. I need to see him without Evgeny Malkin next to him to have um, a real thought as to what's causing that and what's going to fix it. I think as long as those two are stuck together, the impacts are very hard to separate.
Yeah, and I've seen some trade speculation from fans, to be clear, not from anybody in the know about Zucker and maybe it's time to move him. He's a guy who's shown an ability to score at the NHL level. He is someone you got to hang on to, and I think much like Tristan Jarry, your best chance of getting production is to continue to roll that guy out there, and hopefully he returns to the norms we've seen at this level. Zucker has a much longer track record than Jarry, to be clear. It's apples to oranges. It's different positions. Goalie might as well be on a different planet, let alone in the same rink a lot of times. But I feel like patience is still the move with Jason Zucker, too. I want to check Twitter quickly. I did see one comment over there. Eric McClemens commenting, much like we did at the top of the show, those two hit posts very early on were cute when we looked like we were going to be on fire for 60 minutes. Turns out those opening 5 were the only ones in the books. I just don't get that. Yeah, it was just kind of a snoozer overall, Alan. And I know home versus road, it shouldn't mean anything this year, right? Because outside of being able to leave your own house to go to the game that night, I don't really see a difference in terms of the usual home ice advantage, which already is pretty minuscule in hockey compared to most other sports. But yeah, to see them really roll over for the large portion of that game, the vast majority of that game, the Caps were just bodying them. That was, I think, concerning because if I may loop right back to the beginning when I said I thought they were turning the corner a bit, and I felt pretty good about where they were at after that win over the Caps on Sunday. This one just reminds me that that could have just been a blip here. And we're looking at a team that is probably going to tread water and probably going to hang around that 4th or 5th spot in the East Division all season long. So that's my primary takeaway here is just that reality check time. This team is not a team that's probably going to make a push toward the top of the division.
No, and I don't think I've thought that for a while. Maybe not ever. But I certainly think, and again, I talked about this with Dan, is that the middle of this division is very difficult. There's not going to be, like that 4th spot is going to be hard earned by whoever earns it, and they're 3 points ahead of the Devils, who have, I think, 3 or 4 games in hand. They're now 2 points behind the Caps. I mean, that's a tough spot to be in. They are not in a safe position at all, and they're going to have to fight. And I don't know. I don't think the effort was the issue for large stretches of that tonight. I just think they got outplayed a lot of the time. But you'd like to see more pushback against that second period from Washington somewhere, somehow. It doesn't have to be physicality pushback, but it's got to be, you got to have somebody that puts, to use a baseball analogy, like you need a stopper. You need somebody to go over the boards and say, all right, well, I'm sick of us being over there. We got to get over here and play a shift in this end and go go do something about it. I just saw too much of just it's the next guy's turn and they go out there and it was a lot of the same. I never got a feeling like there was any determined effort to change the momentum of that period, and that was really before it got out of hand. I mean, it kind of happened late in that second period. They were getting outplayed all the way through it.
Just a handful of guys ended up on the plus side in terms of shot attempts at 5-on-5. Matheson and Marino were the better defensemen in that category. They were up near 60%. Actually, Kapanen had a pretty good night. To your point, Alan, you felt like he's been playing better recently. Another good night for him playing in the opponent's end of the rink. And Crosby and Rust and Gensel were all just a tick above the 50% mark. But a 5-on-5 ended up being a sore spot third period. The Caps, despite leading, actually controlled the majority of the play in the third until very late. And power play was pretty much a blowout there. The Capitals had a huge advantage in power play shot attempts and scoring chances. Even though they didn't put one in, they still controlled the game in that side of it. And like we were talking about, a couple of early posts, first goal changes things. And the Penguins are allowed to score the first goal. And in one of these games, they're allowed to take an early lead. It has been a real struggle there. They have trailed in all 7 of their wins, and they trailed all the way in this one. 3-1 losers, the Penguins against the Capitals. I want to remind you, we're going to continue to have Penguins coverage here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, our YouTube channel, and we're streaming on both Facebook and Twitter, also simultaneously on the Pittsburgh Hockey Now channels. There you can find this episode embedded on PittsburghHockeyNow.com. Alan Saunders is, our all-around guy here at Pittsburgh Sports Now. You can find him at @Saunders_PGH. Lately covering some Pitt hoops. Right, Alan? I know it's not going the right way for the Panthers, but still a little bit of time to turn it around.
Yeah, we've got a matinee game tomorrow at the Pete, 4:30 tip, NC State. They've got an opportunity. They've got 5 games left on the schedule, 3 of the 5 against teams below them in the standings. They can still make a run, but it's getting late for them to do so, I think. Going to have to make that push starting tomorrow, really.
Yeah, even though the NHL schedule has been pushed back, college hoops is pretty much online, and we're looking forward to March here and a modified March Madness. Hopefully, knock on wood, we get to that point. For those of us who enjoy the springtime, typically is a really good time for sports. I think it's going to be better this year than last year. Like I said, I don't want to jinx it.
It'd be hard to be worse.
Yeah, feeling okay about it. Feeling okay about it at least right now. Alan, thank you so much. Always great to chat with you, whether it's pucks or anything else. And I'll see you next time right here on this station.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to all of you next time. Penguins on the ice again on Thursday. It's basically Islanders and Capitals until the end of the month. That's what it is. We have 2 coming up against the Islanders, 2 against the Caps, then 2 more against the Isles before we turn the calendar page. So if you thought the season was going to be redundant before all the COVID postponements, it's going to be even more so now. We can talk about some benefits and drawbacks to that maybe on the next episode. For Alan, this is Matt saying good night on Pittsburgh Sports Live.